Hello and welcome back to another episode of In Company with Demetra Gray. That's me, and I'm here with an anonymous individual who I cannot name because, uh, can I say your sex?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're going to be talking.
Yeah.
She is going to give us all the insider info on what it was like to be working in DEI in her previous profession and head of DEI for a little bit. Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, we lost the head of DEI and then I took over within whatever capacity I had. No one that saw me as a replacement for her.
Okay, so what was your role?
I was I worked adjacent to human resources in learning and development for the team, helping the team to create programming for our whole organization to grow and develop in their roles.
Okay, that sounded like I don't know what that means, to be
That
honest.
that
That
means
sounds like a lot of like corporate speak where I'm like, does that mean anything really though? Like what was it to you?
So what it was to me, we had funds for people to apply to learn things. So people had an annual stipend that they could use to put towards something they were curious about learning about. So I helped to manage that program. I managed our like performance tracking program. So how is everyone doing based on the expectations set in their role and kind of helping to clean that up or make that more um make it show more relevant information. And yeah, it was a very meta role. Um, and oftentimes I had the question myself of like, what is it that I'm doing?
Yeah. So when you got hired into this position, was it a DEI specific role? No.
No, no.
It
And
just
so I started at like the lowest level and then got shunted. Our team our company reorganized and created new things. So I started as a very general HR person and then kind of got shunted into this team learning and development. And then after a bunch of layoffs, um, DEI started to fall under my umbrella.
so DEI was already part of the organization.
We had a head of DEI before we had like a lot of other things. Like that was really important.
Yeah. When you first joined the company, what was your perspective on DEI? Like, were you super,
Mm.
I want to be all inclusive and I want to be into, like, we'll tell everyone that you're white
I'm
so they
white.
know.
I- I always wanted to like, I'll say like most broadly, like be a good person, be a good human. And so at the time I joined, I was like open. I was not gung ho by any means, but I was like open to this being a way to be respectful of other people and like treat others how they wanted to be treated. So I was, and within my initial capacity, it wasn't such like not what made me most uncomfortable, but like I would say like what made me most uncomfortable because I didn't feel like I understood it or like I would do it right was like how to address people who had different pronouns or like to remember not to say the pronouns that they are not, but that they look like. Like that kind of gave me anxiety in the beginning. It's like, okay, I don't feel like my pronouns are super relevant to share because it's very, what you see is what you get in that way. I'm sure
Uh-huh.
I had them in my email signature and stuff, but
Well,
like,
it's a weird thing, right? Because it's like it's obvious for a lot of people, and then when you see someone who's like a they them, you know that they're a they, or you know that there's something weird. Like you know that there's some like they're not gonna be just they're gonna have some exception.
yes. And the other interesting thing that I really was like, I don't know how to navigate this when people would be like having two pronouns, so she, they.
Yeah.
So
Which one do
I'm
you
like,
use?
Is there one that like, should I mix it up? Do you like, am I being lazy if I only use she? It just like added layers of kind of like, I'm already someone who overthinks things. And it like
Yeah.
added these layers of like, okay, how do we like best navigate this world? Uh,
Yeah. it activates the people-pleasing tendencies too, I think, for those of us that have already had them, or like you really you wanna do it right, you wanna do it well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I the one thing I want to say, no matter where this conversation goes, the one thing I really want to say is like, I love all of these people. They're sweet people. They're wonderful people. Everyone is like, for the most part, I don't think anyone is meaning, like, everyone's meaning well and they're thinking that what they're doing is a really good thing.
totally.
That's what also made it really hard to be there the longer and the more I sort of understood my position and like my perspective on how I didn't think it was the best thing to tell people that they were constantly a victim, for instance. That's what made it really hard because I was like, I'm not interested in like getting into it with people about what's right and what's wrong and what they should do and what they shouldn't do. I just, it started to become more and more clear for me that it wasn't in alignment with like what
Yeah.
I believe to be.
So was there a time for you at the beginning, I guess, when you wholeheartedly believed it, or was there still always a part? Because it's
No,
an interesting question, because when I think back on myself, I think like at the time I would have told you I'm 100%, anti-racist, non-transphobic, like I'm all inclusive. Like I'm all for that, but there was always still a part of me that like didn't really get it, but I just gaslit myself by being like, well, that's just the part of me that is racist or transphobic, so I like I'm not allowed to have that part.
so when I think back on the timeline, I started working there during COVID. So I had already begun listening to the canceled voices, like the Jordan Petersons, the Russell
Yeah.
Brands, the Brett Weinsteins. I'd already started listening to those people. So I was not, if I was in wholeheartedly, it was like when I was in college and just being like, oh my gosh, I like learned everything wrong. Like,
Right,
you
right,
were
right.
all messed up, whatever. And so by that time, I was
Wait,
like,
wait, wait, wait. I want to pause you though, because was college the time you were introduced to it?
yeah,
Because that's what happens.
yes,
Like
yeah.
it seems to be that was it for me too, was like going to university was like the liberal world of, hey, there's all these things, sexism, racism, like all these stuff you have to now learn about that you've been doing wrong this whole time and no one's ever taught you. And okay,
Yeah.
so it's the same for you.
Yeah. And it was kind of like, that the whole like learning that I had it wrong kind of like came in waves. I remember, so I went to college, I graduated, and I went to both a small private liberal arts school, which was like fully there,
Uh-huh.
and then I went to a state school that it was less like top of mind. There was just like a lot more kids who didn't seem to care about much of those types of things.
Interesting.
The other one was like everyone was a social activist, and then at the state school, it was just you were just there to do your thing, is how it felt. And then after that, I ended up moving to San Francisco, and I'll never forget like walking down the street and having this realization that my political views historically have been that of like an old white man, and feeling like, oh my gosh, what a failure that that's the lens through which I see things.
The worst one,
The
the old
worst.
white man.
Yeah. So that was like um that was an incredibly disorienting time in my life because it had me question like so much.
And what was the main emotion that you felt, do you think,
Mm.
in that?
To give that moment a little more color, I moved to San Francisco the month after Trump was elected in 2007, 16, 7, yeah,
Yeah.
so a month or two after. So I moved there from a place that had decorated with Trump signs for Christmas, like.
Yeah.
And then I was there and there were like grief circles about, so
Whoa.
it was such a, that was so disorienting. So the main thing I felt there was like, if these people, so kind of terror would be the emotion, if these people knew me or where I'm from, I
Yeah.
would represent to them this terrible person and like this terrible thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. That was in were you upset when Trump was elected in 2016?
So
Did you not really care?
I was, I, I was like, given those two candidates, I'm a big fan of not being an apathetic voter. So I was like, I need to vote, but I literally pulled out of a hat.
Really?
My mom and we both pulled out of hats to say like, I don't know who the best. I said like, I surrender. Whoever's best for the good of all. Like that's what I'm gonna do. So
Which one did you pick?
Trump.
Really?
Yeah, so I voted for him and then I got there and was like, "Oh my gosh, if only these people knew."
And you were like, I'm a secret Trump voter because I pulled out of the hat.
Yeah, like I
And
didn't
if
even
these
want.
people knew that I voted, you know what's really interesting to me lately is like there's a lot of hidden people like that in liberal circles, and the liberals have no idea.
Mm,
Like, I talk to people often who they're like, all my friends are liberal. Like, my closest friends are all liberal, and they don't know how I feel. And it makes me think about from the perspective of the liberal people, like, I mean, I'm sure it must happen the other way around too, I guess, but like, it's just interesting to me that you can think so, like, you know, your friends, all my friends think this way. But if a lot of people actually just aren't sharing what they think with you because they're afraid that you're going to think that they're a bad person,
hmm.
then they keep it to themselves. And so I think about that often where I'm like, I feel like every friend group has at least a secret Trump voter.
Yeah, I think so. I know someone who is dating someone and they're on the one they like this person a lot, but they voted for Trump. And I'm like, the fact that they're telling me this means that they think that I thought they would have known that I did too. So,
Yeah,
I mean, maybe they don't care because they're not considering ever marrying me, and that's fine. But like, I was like,
right.
oh, I wonder.
And so your mom, did she vote? She pulled out of a hat as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm. We both pulled the same.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
God is on Trump's side.
Yeah.
That's funny. So me in 2016, I was wholeheartedly, I was back in school again, which was part
Mhm.
of it because I think I was 24 or 25. I like had gone back to school again and I was like in university, learning more things. I was going back for social work at the time. I thought I was gonna, so I was like taking social work classes where we learned about equity and we were, we were talking about all of these things and they were very, very, very important. And I was like, I stayed in bed crying when he won. I thought the world was over, and it seemed like everyone around me thought the world was over. And I just like bawled my eyes out, and I thought it was just the most terrible thing that could have ever happened. But then for me, it was like, it was the combination. So, how did you react? Because for me, it was the combination of like COVID and also I joined the cult. And so I think the cult like broke me out of wokeness, but it put me in a cult. But
Mhm.
like because that was summer of 2020 was when all the George Floyd stuff was happening. So
Mhm.
that was what I was going to ask you is like when all that happened, the Black Lives Matter stuff getting really huge.
Mhm.
How were you thinking then?
Um, at
You
first,
remember?
I think I posted a black square. Or
Mm-hmm.
I didn't I know I thought about it. I was like, what do you do? And then it was like what you do is you listen to that book by that lady like how to there was a book that was like a workbook for how to not be a racist white person.
Like how to be an anti-racist
I
or
can't remember.
something
It's
different?
probably hold on. It's probably in my Audible library because that's got a thing to it.
There were so many of those books. Like I remember when all that stuff was happening, I was panicked. I made a post immediately like disavowing racism and kind of being like clearly I need to do even more and learn even more. Um and I was like I must have bought 10 different anti-racist books.
Um, I was with you in that like I felt like taking action was necessary, but I was like, tell me one good thing to do so I'll actually do it. I was like, just one good thing, I'll focus on it, I'll do this. And I followed a couple people And I just remember feeling like such a piece of shit from listening
Yeah.
to those people. And I was like, I have learned like part of my spiritual practice is doing whatever it takes for me to feel good.
Yeah.
And so this does not align with my spiritual practice. And I don't mean like feel good like hedonistically, but like not cause myself unnecessary pain and suffering. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, this is not like, how is me being miserable helping somebody else? I don't understand. Like that doesn't make any sense. So I started listening to the book, and then that was what did it. I was like, this is BS. Like after listening to it, I was like, this is so ridiculous that there's
Well,
no, this goes nowhere. This just feels
it's
like
a big thing that you recognize that. I did not recognize that in the moment. I was just like, I should feel shame. Like, I was just like, I should feel terrible because clearly me and all the other white people are terrible people.
I do have to say my lifelines were like listening to these voices that like I would, because we couldn't really go places and I was cooking a lot, I would put somebody on to talk in the kitchen while I was there, and it like helped me keep my sanity so much because lots of influences from outside were saying other things. And so redirecting to like I need to keep programming myself for like what I feel to be true in my like body and my knowing was really important. But it was a, I mean, it still can be hard when I feel like as a result of all of this, in the past, I would have never looked at people and based on their skin color, think about what they thought of me.
Yeah.
And now I'm like looking around going, does that person think I'm a bad person because maybe I didn't hold the door long enough? Or do they think I was biased because I did like, I walked in front of them? Did that make me like,
Yeah.
like I don't think I ever would have evaluated these micro movements that are so like not just so insignificant
Yeah.
and had them mean so much.
Yeah.
Like really
Well,
tied up a lot of energy in them.
I think like when I see those studies that say that DEI in general makes people more racist, like that's what I feel like it did for me. Like that I totally believe that because I feel like up until I started immersing myself in all of that, I didn't think like I had black friends. I didn't think about it. It wasn't like oh I need to treat them differently or I have to be careful here, whatever. Like it my mic just got I mic'd it, but now it
Oh, it was doing a little echo.
connected back. I don't know. Well, hopefully it'll stay put. I never thought about it very much. And once learning about it all, I became like so keyed in. And then I feel like it increased like me seeing people as so inherently different. I remember being horrified learning about racism and being like, oh, I think I am sometimes scared. Like if I see a black man like walking across the street and I'm alone, like I do get a little afraid and that's so racist. And so then I would like go out like once I learned that I was like, oh, I should like smile or I should not, but I shouldn't treat him like extra special, but I need to also like there was all these things I started doing
Hmm.
instead of just being like maybe it's normal for me to feel that way about any man when I'm alone. Like I think there's just things that
We're
are
wired. Like
yeah,
we're programmed for survival. And so that doesn't mean we're like programmed to be evolved all the time.
it's just a really crazy thing. So tell me how it showed up in work for you. Like oh,
On meetings, there were just things that I would be like exploding to say that I knew I couldn't say.
like what?
Um, we planned a retreat. My team was like responsible in part for planning a retreat, and the initial location selected happens to be like a very liberal location, but it's in a conservative state.
Hmm.
And so when the location was announced as a surprise, there were many people who felt like unsafe to go to this state.
Which
And
is crazy. A whole state.
a whole state. And it's not like we're having you really drive through the back roads. You're flying into the city that it's going to be in that has like a big flamboyant scene. Let's just say that. There's like a big flamboyant scene in this city and because of the state people didn't feel safe there. And my position the like basically then you can find fault with any location because if it's in a different country, say we're going to Mexico, well we
Yeah.
don't we don't like the way they treat their citizens, or we like there's you can find the place we ended up going, everyone was happy in the end, but there were comments that like I'm sure that this property was initially owned by like slave owners, or like it was colonial, it was in a colonial part of the country.
Uh-huh.
And so I just was like, why are we trying to satisfy people who can't be satisfied? That's kind of, I was like, why are we going through all this effort, waste, like spending this money and this time when we know that we can't please everyone?
Uh-huh.
And like, we just can't. Like, so those are the types of things where I was like, can we just be practical for a second? But it
Yeah.
didn't, there were particular people who I just was like, I don't need to make trouble with like this. What does this matter to me? It's not my budget line. I'm not the person who calls the shots. Remember, you're just a minion and like do what you need to do here.
Keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that the other people around you felt like you, or do you think, like, how many people do you think felt that way but couldn't speak up as opposed to people who just fully were on board?
Very hard to say.
Yeah.
Very hard to say. I know who was vocally in support of like acquiescing to whatever degree. What was really interesting is the head of my department, that role shuffled a lot while I was there. It was very hard if you had come from, so it's a C-suite level role.
Mm-hmm.
So that person has had industry experience. So they come to our organization with their industry experience and then are met with like, no, 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 no. All of these things that are normal at other companies, you can't do here.
Because it is
Because,
harmful in some way.
yes. And so because of that, my favorite leader of our team was the person who actually like he did not last there long, and I left when he left essentially, but like we were able to be like confidants to one another to be like this is so there were things about it that were actually like legal liabilities as far as like the way people were encouraged to interact with one another in like a way that it was like therapy. And it's like, why are we inviting people to expose difficult times with bosses, with people who could retaliate, who could use this against them? Like that's private stuff. We shouldn't be like,
Wait, why was that happen? Like, what was was that a policy, or like, was it
it was like team building.
okay? What did you
It
do
was
for
team
team
building
building?
that made me like I was like I'm incredibly uncomfortable. I did not I don't pay these people to be my people, my therapist. I work with them. Like they
Okay, so tell us about team. What did you do during team building?
this was sometimes team building was just like fun and light. And then there was an annual event where I mean, I was only to one of them because it had been not in person because of COVID. And then I was only the
Right.
one in person one. And I, it just was like questions about your life, like sharing like campfire, but like not, it was facilitated. So there was someone that was there directing how like what questions we asked, what we shared with one another. And like I thought it was very disrespectful of people's like maybe they have PTSD, maybe that like we don't need that's not about our bottom this is not about our bottom line, this is not about us like working better together. It didn't, to me, I could not find the link up to like what our mission is. It achieved, there was another event that like achieved the impact of like having people like crying and feeling really like seen and like touched.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, this is freaking manipulative because this person who's telling you she loves you right now, she might lay you all off next week. And like, she's
Oh,
just telling
weird.
you she loves you, but she just laid them off. Like, she just laid 50 of us off or more, whatever, like 2 months ago. But like now you're all crying and she's telling you she loves you.
So that stood out to you.
It
You were
was,
like, this is not okay.
well, and you were going through the culty thing, and I was like,
Right.
this is a permutation. Like, this is that in a
Yeah.
different flavor, like different format.
Yeah.
That's what it felt
Can
like.
you differentiate for people, like for anyone who might be listening who's kind of like, well, what's so bad about like sharing some personal stuff with your coworkers? Like, what made it different?
So what I believe makes it different is you have a contract that says they can fire you and you can leave.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're doing your job, they can pay you. You stop doing your job, they stop paying you. Cool. Where it gets really blurry is if now somebody knows something intimate about you.
Mm-hmm.
If you trust them all the time and you're super close, like cool, like that's your right to share whatever you want with your coworker. But being that it was happening in a sort of like or company sanctioned forum,
Mm-hmm.
we opened the company up to liability should someone sue because of emotional damage or because later on down the line someone brings that up that they shared in confidence and tells a bunch of people at the organization. And it's like, well, you told me during an event, like you told me during a corporate event.
Mm-hmm.
So from the perspective of like protecting the company and protecting employees, that
Mm-hmm.
felt like out of integrity for me to.
Yeah.
And it was like, we offer resources for you to contact a professional if you're struggling with different things. And like the intention wasn't for it to be a therapy session. It just kind of like goes that way when people are, and everyone's then feeling bad for that person in that moment, and we just take turns feeling bad for each other and like seeing our humanity, which is like on one hand lovely. Like yes, but it's just not the
But
right.
maybe not really conducive to a work environment.
It's not so exactly. Then the challenges we had at that place were that managers wouldn't really take action when someone wasn't performing. Like
Right.
they wouldn't, they felt that that was outside of their role as a support for that person to kind of like enforce the the requirements of their role. That was like, well, they're going through a hard time or they're. And so then it becomes really hard for the organization to function because it doesn't know what its aim is. Like the
Yeah.
individual parts are like, could get really distracted.
Was DEI like what was the main thing your company was trying to do in the world, if you can sort of say
The main
without.
thing was trying to share learning and development with other companies. So
Okay.
that's why it was very meta because what I was doing internally was what our organization did externally and how it interfaced with other companies. So we were hired for our ideas, really, for the ideas
Mhm.
that we had created that would help people work together better.
Mhm.
They included DEI. That was like a part of our suite of offerings that we taught about.
Uh-huh. Do you feel like it was helpful or harmful or
So I have a bit of a nuanced perspective. I think internally it was not helpful. I think most of the organizations, not all, but many of the organizations we went to probably ran in a much more corporate way. And
uh-huh.
I think some of what we taught could be really helpful, like to bring balance when applied in a place that has like a lot of bureaucracy and like it helps, it could be helpful.
Mhm.
So like as a like on a seesaw, if a company was like all bureaucracy, very little time with your manager, like You just feel like you're floating out in the middle of nowhere. You don't know if you're doing a good job. I think what we bring could help like this happen.
Uh-huh. Balancing
In-house,
it out.
in-house we were like this.
Right.
We needed that a little bit more structure, like a little bit more corporate mindedness, like less warm and fuzzy 575 haiku feelings.
Yeah.
So I don't think, like anything, it could be medicine or poison, but I think it was really hard because everyone in the organization was pretty well trained in our content. And so
Mhm.
then everyone was like, that's not how we teach it. Or like, it was like a lot of like you knew you were going to be scrutinized for following because we offered education on so many topics that related to working together.
Uh-huh. The DEI part, do you feel like how did that impact the rest of what you were doing?
It felt largely like a really big distraction. Um, we were a very liberal crew of people who
Uh-huh.
cared deeply about one another. And so it felt like there was a witch hunt for like, how do we figure out how to be better and get out the whatever? And so I was, as at one point, I was tasked with like bringing in education on DEI, which I did. I actually kind of liked. I kind of liked the group I brought in. I felt pragmatic, whatever. Um, but it felt like I don't think we have a lot of, we're not having people report that they're being microaggressed at at the bottom of the threshold, but we certainly don't have people reporting that they're being like verbally mistreated or whatever from the HR side. Like, it's not like people are coming to us saying that there are problems.
Mhm.
And yet, and we have a very diverse organization. And then people were never satisfied. It was like all of our C suite were women. Two of them were women of color, but because those women of color were pretty light skinned
Mhm.
and because they didn't come from like harsh backgrounds, it
Uh-huh.
didn't it didn't count really
To who?
to like the masses. They all thought that we just had white women. And I'm like, wait a minute. They're not
But
this
how do you know? Who is
they
the
would
master
say,
telling?
oh, so we had a survey. We had like an annual survey and people would you could just they were anonymous, but you could see
With
what
like
people
customers or just like in
no
general public?
with our employees.
Oh, with the
We
employees.
would ask the employees like, how satisfied are you in all of these domains?
Oh my
And
God.
the sentiment was that like we're not diverse enough. And it was like, what are we supposed to do?
Well, that's where it gets really crazy, right? Is when you want to have representation of everyone, but then you get into like, do you need to have like a black disabled, like low IQ, like at what point do you draw the line of representation?
Yeah, the perspective I started to have was that like I don't need to get to I mean I'm the type of person who just like I sometimes can't help it and I really ruminate. So part of why I left was like I would wake up in the middle of the night and think about work and like just think about it for like hours and not be able to sleep. And that
Why?
was
What would you think about? What were you stressed about?
I was like stressed about being a part of the problem. I'm like, I'm a part of what's taking society down because I think that this ideology is like bad for everyone. And like,
So you saw it at that point.
oh yeah, I was like, I'm now complicit in like what I think is going to take society down.
That's fascinating.
It was not a problem when when I did, like, once I inherited the DEI role, that's when it was like, how can I be at the tip of this spear? I was in a meeting when someone actually said to me, it was me and another person, I know we all just want to keep getting woker and woker. Like, we'll never be satisfied with how woke we are. And I was like, I said nothing, but I was like, no, I don't want to be woke and I want to stop being as woke as I am. Like, no, that's not a desire of mine. Like, that's not
Was
what
that all coming from you internally, or did you have sort of external, like you were listening to other viewpoints? Because I think it's kind of unusual to be so surrounded by that, but to kind of see through it. But I also imagine there must be a lot of other people like you who are part of implementing it in the workforce and seeing like this actually isn't useful. Like it's not
Right.
doing what I really would like.
Um, as when I started that role, I like loved it so much. The work I did was really fun. Like when I started, not that role, but like when I started at that company, the work was really fun. The people were really great. I made progress. I progressed in my career. It was like I made good money working from home. I got a lot of satisfaction from what I was doing, from getting paid. Like it was really nourishing. And I think it was the combination of like getting closer to that work and keeping the influences coming that were like saying this is really bad for society. That was kind of what brought me to the climax of like, okay, like I thought I was getting an ally in that new man, like that new position person who like we saw things the same way, and then I saw, oh, she's gonna get rid of him. Like, yeah, he's not gonna last. So
Is
then it was
she
like
the boss? Like
the
yeah.
CEO, yeah. I was like, once I knew that like she didn't support him, then I was like, okay, well then I don't have support.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's like it's okay. It's just like very clear that that's the direction they're headed in, and I'm like not headed in that direction. I can't.
Was it not problematic that you were going to be head of DEI as a white woman?
I was replacing a white woman.
Oh.
So
So the head of DEI was already Were they all white? Did you ever have a black head of DEI?
no. There was only one person who sat there before, like she was in that role when I started, and she stayed until she was laid off.
Interesting.
I mean, she was a like warrior type. Um, but yeah.
Wow. I guess I'm wondering like when you are looking now at it coming out all over the world, like the changes that have happened over the last few months especially, how do you feel?
I have a lot more like I don't have that sort of like stress about it ruining
Mm,
society because I realize that it'll cannibalize itself far before that because you can never just like we as an organization couldn't be enough for people. It's
mm-hmm.
like more and more people are going to be like pushed to their limit. Their limits, my limit was somewhere and other people's limits are maybe further, but they're going to get to a point where they're like this I can't get on board with this, and then everyone will hate them, and then eventually they'll just like hate one another until there's like nobody left to hate.
That is what it does.
So then I was
It-
like, oh, beautiful, it will take care of itself. Like I'm not so I also think that in the last few years like I'm not the only person who had this experience. Like a lot of people were like that doesn't make sense to me. And I think that more people are having that experience, and that as we're more vocal about it, you can think that I'm a bad person. I'm like working on other people's opinion of me is none of my business. So it's like
mhm.
if that's if you know me and then based on how I voted or my compliance with some of these rules or whatever, if you decide that I'm a bad person, well then we probably shouldn't hang out.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
okay.
I don't know that it was inevitable that it shut down though without Trump being elected.
It would have dragged much longer. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would have dragged much
But
longer.
yeah, maybe, I mean, eventually, I think everything that is culty tends to eventually like eat itself. Like it does sort of eventually collapse, but I think it does take a really long time. And then some groups and things hang on. Like some people will stay in it forever. Even the COVID, Jordan and I were talking about the other day, like how there's still some people who are like hanging on to COVID as like part of their identity. Like they're still wearing masks inside, outside. They're still like wanting to know if people got COVID tested before they hang out with them. Like there's this weird subgroup who's like still alarmed about COVID
Oh, wow.
in society. And it
Yeah.
makes sense because it's like I think with anything like that, people tend to cling on sometimes. It's the victim kind of thing.
What this is making me think of is Mark Andreessen on one of the Joe Rogan podcasts explained how wokeism is like a religion.
Yeah.
And so its adherents adhere religiously. And the difference between that and, say, Christianity, as an example, is that forgiveness is not, has no place
Um,
there. And so without redemption, without the possibility of redemption, it can't persist.
yeah.
And I was
Well, I
like,
think there's a number of differences in general, but I think that is a big one. That is a big part. You can never win.
yeah. And what was so fascinating, like there were people who were pro cancellation. They're like, that's how we sort this. We
In
cancel people.
your work?
Yeah. Not necessarily like thinking that there was anyone who worked there that needed to be canceled, but they were just supporters of like cancellation of people generally as a good way to mitigate harm.
Yeah. And do you think that did you see people actually engage with these people that should be canceled, like with their work or with, because I don't, yeah, like I think back on myself and there were so many people and things I had opinions about, like strong opinions, whose stuff I had never looked at. Like even Joe Rogan, I'd never listened to a Joe Rogan podcast back in whatever 2016, 20, even 2018. Um, but I knew Joe Rogan was bad
Mm.
and he was like problematic already in some way, although he must have still been Democrat at that point. But I
Mhm.
still was just like, I thought Joe Rogan was problematic. I had never listened to one thing by him. Dave Chappelle, I knew was super problematic. I had never watched one of his shows in my life, but I knew that like I knew certain men and certain names, like these guys are a problem because they are racist or they're whatever. And I remember early on in my relationship with Jordan, like we had a fight because he was like, "Do you think that comedians should be able to joke about whatever they want?" And I was like, "No." And
Mm.
I was super adamant. I was like, "No, they should not be able to make jokes about things that are racist or mean or sexist or like able like all this stuff." I was like really against it. And it was early on in our dating, and he was kind of like even now he'll be like, yeah, there were like some questions I had about like, can she have fun? Like, it's like, is this woman gonna be able to have a good time? And
Mm.
it took me a while, like it took me that loosening of tw in 2020
Mm.
to just be like, oh, but for me, so I had a lot of opinions about people that I actually didn't know anything about,
Mm.
that I had never really engaged with their work. And then it took me having experiences with this anti-race, like I paid thousands of dollars to take an anti-racist course in 2020 in the summer after the George Floyd stuff happened. Uh, I had been following someone, or she was like a close friend of someone I had been following about business. And she started this, like, that was when she started her anti-racist educator business. She had no
Mm.
training in anything, I don't think, but it was like she was a black woman who was gonna teach me. And what was crazy was like all these things started to be normalized. Like she would show up for calls, um, a mess, just like not put together whatsoever, like wearing, sweatpants and like her hair a mess. And just like she would be like, colonialism is like looking nice. So we don't have to look nice. Like all these things were just justified as they're like white people things. And
Oh.
so it's inherently racist for you to expect me to be like put together or professional looking because professional is just like colonial. And really to like a turning point for me was that I made a comment right away in the group because I was reading all these anti-racist books, so I was learning from a lot of different anti-racist, and of course, not every black anti-racist person has the same opinion.
Right.
So they were like, I was hearing conflicting things, and I was like, well, I don't know. I'm trying to do right, which is the right answer. And I posted in the group, and I was like, hey, like this guy in this guy's book it says this, but here you say this, and they like seem to be different. So can you like clarify for me? Like I'm just not sure what to think about this. And everybody, like, people started attacking me in the comments. Some people were like, yeah, I think, like, I'm wondering that too. And then other people were like, this is a problem. And I remember the shame that I felt. It was like this intense, like, I did something really bad, but I don't know what I did.
That,
And
yeah.
it was like, then she held an emergency group call. And we all, like, it was like, this is an emergency. It was a not planned call. She came on and she was angry and like crying and screamed at us all. Like screamed, was really angry about how I made this comment because how dare I question her? Because that was part of the problem. And at the time, I was like, she's black and I'm white, so she must be right. And I I didn't know what to do. I was like, I did something wrong. All these other people are like joining in and saying I did something wrong, but I don't quite still get what I did. But she's really mad, so I must not get it. And I tried for like a few more sessions in there. I was like, I'm like trying to be a good white person. And then luckily, or maybe not luckily, I joined the cult, which then like I dropped off of the anti-racist stuff because in the cult that I had joined, there were black women who were like against it. Like I started
Mhm.
to see other people who were like, I'm black and I don't agree. And I was like, right. And it started to wake me up a little. But I think about that experience and I'm like, I feel like that is the typical white experience in a lot of these spaces. And it opens up this whole world to be for people to be like really abusive and really mean and have full permission to do that.
I think something that you said where it's like in that forum, it
Hmm.
was like there's this one reality happening, emergency meetings, yelling, crying.
Yeah.
And then in a different group of people, there's like, wait, we don't even like this. And I think that kind of is very true about the way it is always. And the people who don't like it aren't usually screaming from rooftops about things. So
Yeah.
it's harder to know that they're out there.
Hmm.
And it's really easy to know that the people who are disgruntled, like they're happy to share, well, on whatever, they're happy to share their grumpy opinions, whatever they are, or their perspective, which is, it's like, okay, you can have that one. But I think that's such a beautiful, I'm like really glad you had that experience of like being surrounded with people who are like, that's actually not a universal.
Hmm.
And it's so easy to get, especially like on social media, to be like, that's how people think about this. Like
Hmm.
the majority of people think about this in this way when that's like not actually true. It's just the
Well,
majority of
I
people
think the
open.
craziest thing about all of this now is it seems like, I mean, we saw in general that especially with gender ideology, like most people don't agree with it. But I think in general, a lot of the DEI, a lot of the woke stuff is not at all as popular as people made it seem. Like now,
Yeah.
I don't know, have you been seeing the USAID stuff?
Yeah.
Like I don't think people understand like what is coming out about that because if you're watching liberal news still, it's just very like, oh, they're ending aid to starving children in Africa. But this organization was pushing woke, like we were using our money to fund woke stuff everywhere in other people's governments, in our own news.
I'm not, I'm like familiar with just a couple data points that I thought were disturbing, but uh yeah, it's so interesting how the source of your information today matters so, so much as to how you perceive what's going on around you.
Hmm.
And I think about that a lot in interacting with people where it's like my mom and I could have in 20 when in 2019 we could be on the phone for 2 hours. Well, no, wait, COVID. 2020. We could be on the phone for 2 hours arguing about the merits of President Trump versus President Biden. Like it happened. We were on for two
Oh,
hours. I voted for Biden in 2020 and
oh,
in 2024.
Did your mom vote for Biden in 2020 or was
So
she
she
no,
was from
okay.
Trump.
Interesting.
But but we had that conversation for a long time, and then I realized like my mom and I, we really see things really similarly. Like
Yeah.
our deeply held beliefs are really similar. So it has to be the information we're taking in on a day-to-day basis that's
Mhm.
telling us that things are really different. Because I'm like, we're both pretty reasonable people, and I didn't even fight with her when I was a teenager. So like, why am I fighting with her now? Like it doesn't make sense. And so then I started to be like, oh dang, it makes it hard to interact with people that get different sources. So
Yeah.
I can't focus on those types of things because it's like you can't, not that you never win, but it's like you don't feel like there's any progress of understanding made. So I
No.
think like it's gotten me to think about, well, what is it to be a more effective communicator? And it's like to have better questions, to get
Yeah.
people into their own critical thinking. And I'm not saying I'm good at it, but like I think that's like what feels like the mandate now is to stay open, stay curious, take nothing personally.
Mhm.
Really not about like people on high want it to be personal. It's not.
Yeah.
But um I think it was like $260 million to George Soros through USAID.
Well, the thing is, like, the main problem is now it's not even the difference between some people watch like more liberal media and others watch more conservative media. It's like, what if your liberal media, like, what if your media is being funded on purpose to push these agendas? They're not like independent, completely people who just happen to be like, you can find, that's why I really like independent journalism because it's like, at least they might be super liberal or super conservative, but like you're getting someone who's not being paid to push an agenda and they're not being told like, no, you can't write about that.
They're getting paid when I buy the whitening tooth strips that they share about or like subscribe to their Substack. That's when they're
Right.
getting paid.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Yeah.
It's a weird time. Are
It
you in
is.
a liberal area now?
So I live in Northern California. Happens
Uh-huh.
to be that we have a very small town. Within the town, it's pretty liberal, but the majority of residents spread out over the larger area are conservative.
Uh-huh.
And so that everyone coexists seemingly quite nicely there, but it's really nice to live somewhere where you can talk to your neighbors about things and like everyone feels sort of not like
Yeah.
we don't have all the same opinions or beliefs by any means, but we have a shared vision of like what progress looks like.
Yeah.
Really nice.
Yeah. It's funny, I noticed people like my dad, I think still is confused talking to me now because I'm like, did you see this and this thing that Trump did and whatever? And like my dad has voted for Trump the whole time, but
Mhm.
I like was so angry at him for it. Like I wasn't gonna speak to him even in 2020. Like I was like, should I not talk to this man ever again? My dad is like now one of the closest people. He's my one of my favorite people in the world. But in 2020, I was like, should I cut him out because I'm being complicit in even like being close to him if he's gonna vote for Trump again? And so I think he's having like some whiplash of
I
he's
bet.
been like reading my pieces and stuff, and he's like, wow, like, this is great, but it's like I have to tell you, it's still a little weird to like be able to talk to you about anything political.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing.
Yeah. I I don't I think it's so interesting. It's so interesting because of how convinced and having been in that camp where you cried after he was elected, like seeing clips, people are making fun, like people on the right are making fun of people on the left who are crying,
Yeah.
and I don't think that's nice at all. But I think it is so terrible for media to have spun stories about this person that gets people this terrified when at Jimmy
Right.
Carter's funeral, Obama's sitting next to the next Hitler and having a nice conversation.
Yeah.
If he was really the next Hitler, would you go to his inauguration?
Yeah. That is how I feel when I see those videos too. A little bit is like, I'm like, wow, look at that person. It's acting crazy. But then I'm like, this is awful
This is,
that people are feeling this awful
yeah.
because they're consuming stuff that isn't real. Like they're getting stuff spun to them. It's super culty. I mean, that is what cults do. They have to make the other side look terrifying. Like you have to make people afraid of anybody who doesn't think like that. But it's really it's it's hard to even talk to anybody who's full on in belief of that because there's
Yeah.
no room. And what's crazy, I think, is like your critical thinking in that state gets shut down more. And so I find that people that are super woke aren't really able to have, like, I have tried with people that I know to ask questions, like you were saying, like to kind of be curious instead of, because I don't care if anybody believes what I believe. Like I've believed too many different things to have invested. Like I'm just like, whatever. We all are gonna have different opinions at different times. But I'm like, I will ask questions to kind of poke and be like, well, what do you think about this? Or what? But what I notice is that anything that I point out or ask about that might shake the worldview gets shut down very quickly by
Mm.
like something that doesn't really have to do with that. Like in one of the last conversations I had, someone was like, well, you're just really good at arguing, and like I would have to go look up all my sources and like come back to you because like and I wasn't really arguing. I was just like, "Well, what do you think about this?" or like, "What about this part of it?" And like and it gets just shut down by something that isn't factual and doesn't isn't actually part of the discussion. And I think um, I recognize that in myself from years ago, which is how I used to feel when I didn't really know. I just had this like deep conviction, but I didn't really have all the information to back it up. I just believed. And so it was hard to really get into like a nuanced discussion with someone about it because I didn't really know. I just was like a believer.
Yeah. And I mean that when I think about that from the perspective of like self-preservation and like ego preservation,
Yeah.
it's like, of course, in a rather casual conversation with this person, you're not real, like someone's probably not interested in testing their deep belief. Like
Yeah.
it's, and it would cause defenses to go up and like totally a shift into the irrational mind, like the
Hmm.
irrational, like let's just make this stop, kind of like what can I do to make this stop space. When they said that you're good at arguing, what they meant was like you're really good at asking questions that get me to think about things I don't want, which feels
And
like
it's like I don't like that. It feels
it,
like an attack.
it feels like you're challenging me. And in a way, you're not challenging them, you're challenging the way they're thinking about it. But like
Yeah.
I think it's off limits. Depending on the person, it can be off limits for a while. Or
Yeah. Do you have any other work DEI related stories that you can
oh
tell?
my gosh. I think I've been thinking about it since we talked about doing this, and the biggest thing that was kind of the through line for me was, and again, it was like transposed on top of the work that we were doing together. So, work on the victim triangle. And I have, I have feelings about that, and it can be
Me
taken to
too.
it has its place, and it can be taken to an extreme, and it's just kind of like figuring that
Yeah.
out. Um, but going back to like what I knew to be true from when I was young, and from what I always knew that like what I think about me makes a big difference on my behavior, on my actions. So if I think
Mm.
I can do something, then that is really fuel. And if I think I can't, then I don't have the fuel to do that. And so, just from that really simple premise, I looked at the way we languaged around people as saying, like, certain people, things are harder for. Certain people, they don't have the same opportunities as other people, and not not in the sense of evaluating whether or not that's true, because I actually believe life's not fair and that it's not supposed
Yeah.
to be.
Yeah.
But I was like, I think this is incredibly not helpful to the
Yeah.
people. I think that when you keep digging for the root of your victimhood, you'll just keep digging. You'll never get to the bottom of it. And so it's like, I want to be a part of something that helps people grow. And like, this looks like something that doesn't. So
Yeah.
that was where, even with all the voices and the you should be a better person, it was like that, seeing that happen in real time, how we're like putting people down
Yeah.
who were saying like need extra help.
Mhm.
I was like, that's not my legacy. Like that's not, I don't believe that works. If it works, cool.
Yeah.
I can't get behind it because I don't believe it works, and I believe we're actually harming. Word, but like I believe we're setting people
Causing
back.
harm.
Um, so there were, in one-on-one interactions with some of like the most far on the spectrum DEI people out there, I had really great interactions and like would have considered us to have like a good working relationship. Although I think if that person, if I got to explain more about what I thought, that person would disagree with me very heartily. And like, that's okay. It's okay that we disagree with one another. Um, but yeah, just generally, it made for a very, not a very cleanly operating organization. It was very delicate, it was complicated, and an energy drain for all of us.
But did you feel like you could disagree anyway?
I didn't. But I think that's my, I don't think that's, no one could have, but I didn't have the strength of whatever. Like the people I was talking to, they had all the facts. They were the teachers of
Yeah.
this. So, yeah, I felt like, okay, all the people that I look to and listen to are the people that are on their canceled list. Like, I think that was also a permutation of working there, is I really sought out other voices to balance. And it became like, I never listened to Joe. I knew of Joe Rogan. I didn't have a lot of feelings about him. A previous
Yeah.
boyfriend listened to him constantly, and I was like, what are you doing? Whatever. And then when he was canceled and Brene Brown said she's getting off Spotify if he's on Spotify, then I was like, I gotta listen to him. So it was like, as people got canceled, I was like, I want to read the books they want to burn. That was like always my, I was like, what is he saying that's so bad? Like, I need to
Yeah.
know. And then I got endeared to all of these, all of these people. Um, yeah, so I think what yeah, feeling like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Not that I actually believed that of myself, but that the organization would see me that way.
Yeah.
I think that was what was really, really like hard to endure personally.
Yeah.
Like why I didn't
Yeah.
confront it at all.
It really makes me wonder how many people feel that way secretly.
There were some little glimmers in those surveys that would come out about like people who were Christian kind of feeling like they were discriminated against.
Right.
But those people didn't use strong language around that. But that was an interest. Like I was like, okay, there's some people out there, but like it's hard to know. It's like
It's
hard to know
hard to know who.
who it
Well,
is.
that is the weird thing too, is like if you're white and Christian, you're not really included in a lot of ways, even though it's so inclusive and it's like we're bringing everybody up, there
Yeah.
is allowed to be discrimination around that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's one last thing that I thought was
Yeah.
interesting and that might be, I don't know, food for food for thought for all of us. Um, I see parallels between like wokeism and communism, as
Yeah.
they're like different on the continua moving in the same direction, just like by different names or slightly different places. And something I heard recently that I thought was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense is that communism will always be born in a merit-based system where merit stops being the measure. So
Oh,
once everyone is just mediocre or not very good, then communism is born because they're like, I got to keep my place even though I'm not good.
yeah.
And it just makes so much sense that that
Huh.
would be the very natural evolution, the very natural progression of like a lot of incompetent people.
Of course.
They would say like, okay, well then let's level it. Let's make sure we all get the same. And then it made it not so scary. It was like, oh, when you could kind of see how that could like really logically transpire. Oh, okay. Well, then we need to watch out to make sure that we don't put parameters in place that make that really likely to be born out of the situation.
Do you know where you heard it? Do you remember?
Yes. It was Brett Weinstein on the Dark Horse podcast.
I love Brad Weinstein.
Me too.
Um,
He's up by you, I think.
what?
I think he's up by you. I think
Oh
they're
yeah?
yeah, they're on an island and they have something from Salt Spring Island. They have like a piece of art from an artist.
Really?
Hmm.
Are they in Canada? They're not in Canada.
No,
They
they're in
must be in
Washington.
Washington.
Yeah.
We're not going to be here for too much longer, but uh
Have you shared where you're headed?
I have not, but I will tell you. Um, yeah, so but I will we're moving to back to the States. Over probably on the east side. But I think that our society seems to be becoming more and more communistic. Is communistic a word? Like communism. Like,
Yeah.
and what was weird was when I first learned about communism in my early 20s, I was like, that sounds great. Like with my ideal mindset, like when
Mhm.
I was young, I was like, wow, that sounds so nice. Everybody's equal. Like, why does everyone say communism is so bad? I didn't get it. And now I'm like, this is terrible. And it's like that. I think a lot of the principles sound nice in theory. Oh, everybody will be equal. We'll make life fair. We'll like make everybody have the same things. Um, and in practice, it goes terribly.
Mhm.
I've been thinking a lot about just like how much I have shifted around these things because like even in our schools there's like no child left behind, that thing. I mean, how shitty is that when you're someone smart?
And it's not worked because now
We've just all gotten dumber.
they've all gotten, and I mean, COVID did not help, but it's become that the focus of school is not to like have people learn and be excellent. It's like, it's not that. And it shows in
Yeah.
like test results and whatever. Yeah.
And it's just I was reading the other day. It's a more like liberal view book, but it was talking about how I want to say it was back in the 50s. I don't know if I'll get it wrong. At some point, the tax rate on the wealthiest Americans was 70%. And I was like, so she was kind of describing how corporations worked politically to like get the tax rate to benefit the really rich people. And so they got it down from like 70% to whatever, like 28% or 25%, something like that. And they were saying how like then the taxes for the lowest class like started to rise. And I don't really know a ton about how all of that works, but I was like, there are so many people, especially on the woke side, who would cheer for that and be like, yeah, all these people with lots of money should pay 70% tax. Who wants to make a ton of money and do super well and excel at what you're doing only to be penalized more and more?
Well, that and if you are actually in that tax bracket, you have
Yeah.
the resources to make your residence somewhere where the tax rate is not 70%.
Yeah.
So then all of that money leaves the country.
Yeah. Nobody want, and I think it's absurd. It's like, I can't imagine it can only be people who have never done anything with their life and who will never do anything, who can really like cheer for that and be like, yeah, people with more should be penalized to have less because like they can afford it. Then not only do people not want to do well, but like you said, they'll
Yeah.
just go somewhere where they can. I know Jordan has a lot of friends who are moving to like the United Emirates or whatever, something.
UAE.
Yeah, because apparently that's like a great business place right
Yeah.
now. And we were like, I don't want to live there. But
Yeah.
there is this sort of like, it's crazy.
It's short-sighted.
Yeah.
I can be with them at the first, like when I first hear that, I'm like, well, yeah, their 30% left over is still a lot of money. But that's not me putting myself in that person's position. If that's mine, I'm like, I'd rather I trust myself to like know how to use it. So I'll spend it on good things. Like I want to have the control. I don't want the government to decide where my money gets spent. I want to spend it on the projects, the programs, the whatever it is that I want to create. Why should I have to give it to the government to decide? I see how irresponsible they are with funds when they get them.
Yeah.
So, like, please trust me to be a good human with this. And I mean, but that's how I would feel if I were in that person's shoe, like that position.
Yeah. And then the more and more rich people you know, I think the more you start to understand, yeah, how much money is being corrupted and used like in nefarious ways. It also makes me think about like I volunteered at the food bank here for a while.
Mm.
And I had a sort of similar trajectory. And I don't know enough to be able to argue like whether food banks should exist or not. But I had this sort of experience with like at first, I was like, this is a beautiful thing. I was so touched. I would leave crying every
Mm.
time, being like, oh, these people have nothing. This is so sad. And like, I was very touched by it. But then the longer that I spent there, the more kind of jaded I started to get because I would see like I interacted with everyone who came to pick up food. So I would like collect the food all together and then I would go and like hand it out the door to different people. And some of them, I have no doubt, really, really needed it a lot and had come unexpectedly upon hard times and they needed some community support. Like I know that that happens ever.
Hmm.
But a lot of them too, I were just like, these are kind of like shitty people. Like they're just like they're they don't want to do anything with their life. They're just sort of making an identity out of being like poor and sort of dirty and incapable. Like they're just like, "Oh, I'm gonna just take all these things because I can, and I'm gonna go um I don't know what they do all day, but kind of nothing. Like there were a lot of even like young people, and I remember being in when I went to University of Vermont for a semester. I was 20 at that time, 20. I hung out with some of the homeless people. I was like really into different life experiences and I wanted to know the homeless people. And uh who knows what some of them they were addicts or whatever. One of them was just a kid someone told me was from like a rich Vermont family who wanted to be homeless. Like he just, he smoked a lot of weed and just like made himself homeless. Like he just lived out on the street. And I hung out with this kid a bunch and there was like this sort of coolness in not participating in society. And I think
Mm.
like it can kind of not for everyone, but it's like the way that victim becomes your identity. Like these things, there's this way it just gets more and more an identity. And kind of the turning point for me was when I gave food to a family. There was a mother with a little baby, and I handed the bag out, and then she came back to the door and she knocked, and I was like, yeah, and she was like, uh, it was like I had given her some form of it was like a chicken apple blend of something, and she handed it back, and she was like, they like my child can't eat meat. Um, so basically, can you go back and get a vegan option because we're gonna let them decide whether they want to eat meat or not. Like we're gonna leave it up to them. Like they're vegan right now, and I'm gonna leave it up to them because we don't feel like they should eat meat without being able to consciously choose. And I just kind of hit this point of like, what am I like? What are we doing? I don't think this is help. This is not helping this person. You cannot convince me. Like, this woman is in a position where she's turning down food because it's not vegan, because she's letting her kid decide if they're going to be a meat eater when they're whatever. Who knows? The same age people let their kids decide whether they're going to be a different gender. Like,
Mhm.
at what age does the kid get to make a conscious decision? I don't know. Like, it was just so absurd.
Yeah.
And in the past, I used to feel like my repulsion at certain people like that was something bad about me.
Mm.
And now I'm less convinced that that's true because I have compassion for people that are like really, they're addicted or they have a hard time or whatever. But there's also like a subset of people where it's like this shouldn't be encouraged. You shouldn't be encouraged to be more and more and more of a victim. Like, oh, I'm disabled and let me just, and as someone who was diagnosed with a chronic illness, like it's so annoying to me. Did you know the term spoonie already?
No.
I learned the term spoonie for the first time like in the last month or two. That's what they call people who are chronically ill call themselves spoonies as like an affectionate term because of the spoon theory of like do you have enough spoons to get through the day? That's how much like emotional capacity you
Oh,
have. So
wow.
they're like, "Oh, I'm a spoonie because like I have less capacity than others." And I cannot think of anything that would be more damaging for me than to start believing that like I have less capacity and everybody must treat me differently and now I'm this thing.
I that yes. So going just like one thing
Yeah.
that you mentioned about people that aren't being encouraged, like they're not really being helped.
Yeah.
I think of it in terms of parenting a lot,
Yeah.
where at one for a time it's the parent, and then the parent might not be doing a good job, and it's on the parent to rectify for the sake of the child, for the
Yeah.
well-being of the child. And then there becomes a point where no matter what happened with your parents, it becomes yours.
Yeah.
The gift you get, or not, or pile of poop, whatever it is, that you're like, this is now mine to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about how government, anything can be a stand-in for that parent. And has it gotten better at parenting?
Yeah.
Or is it still doing? And like that's, I guess, a lens that I don't know is considered when we're like when social programs are being created.
Yeah.
Like where are we putting the incentives for people
Mm-hmm.
within this program? And topic for a different day, but I think that like that analogy makes it easier to like see it for what it is. And then when it comes to spoonies, that made me think of I met someone once. She was like a coach for highly sensitive people, HSPs.
Uh-huh.
And she, after talking to me for a little bit, was like, "You're an HSP."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I thought about it. I like wrestled with that for a little bit. And it's like, it's true in ways, but that comes with so much baggage that will make me a victim. Like that will
Yeah.
make me cling to that. My mom went, oh, this is how I got really clear on that. It's your gift or your pile of poop. Part of my path when I was in San Francisco was I went to grad school to become a therapist. So enter like the most liberal therapy school in the country, say.
Mm-hmm.
And everything gets blamed on your upbringing. Like everything in that got blamed on my upbringing. So my parents are visiting me and I'm kind of like nagging on them about like their shortcomings as parents. And my mom let me have it. And I was like, we did the best we could do. We are not perfect people. We did the best we can do, and now it's your problem. And like, stop complaining to me because I have no patience for this. And I am so grateful to her for that moment because that's
Yeah.
where I got my power back. Like
Yeah.
she handed it to me. I cried and I was like, "You're right." And that ended that for me. And
And she didn't take it on, it sounds like. Like, she wasn't like, "Oh, you're making me a bad mom."
no, it was really funny. She got that way with my brother sometimes. Like he calls me a bad mother, and she like believe, but with me, she was like, "No, that's not true. They're putting cockamamie things in your head. Like you can't go there because that's it's just not going to end well for you." And so she did it out of knowing that it wasn't helping me. Like
Yeah.
she was.
That is a good parent,
That's a good parent.
ironically.
Yeah, to be able to not care about the short-term emotional state of this being,
Yeah.
knowing that you're setting them up for like long term. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know why, but that felt like that was an important inflection point.
Well, I think that is it's like what's empowering for people. It's nice to have compassion, but then when you're starting to get more and more identified with how you can't do things
Hmm.
or how things are just so hard, like that's not helpful to people at all. It's curious some of these programs like a lot of things because I'm in BC and like they have safe injection sites and stuff
Mm,
like that. And I wonder, like I don't know very much about that, but I it makes me wonder certain things. Like I read some critique of that the other day and it was like, is it good? Like when we think we're helping, but
yeah.
are we actually helping? Like when we're sort of encouraging I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know the answer, but I just think I think there's a lot of things like that that we haven't been allowed to question because uh you'll be seen as a bad person.
And what you noticed in your time at the food bank is like when you're the person interfacing, that's when you have a good sense
Yeah.
of like what's going on. And it's just we can't be the person interfacing like everywhere.
But
Like,
I totally. And
yeah.
I felt even there, I felt like even me, who's quite outspoken in general, like the woman who was in charge seemed to be fully like food bank believer.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, I'm never gonna hint at my
Yeah.
like certainty here because I'm afraid that like I ended up just quitting for other reasons too, but I was just sort of like I think that they're gonna hate me if I even
Yeah.
ask a question. Like,
Yeah.
is this really helping people? I feel like that's a terrible thing to say. You're not allowed to say that or ask that question.
Yeah. When really perspectives like yours are what could help make the program way better for the people. But the way it's set up makes it that like there's fear to even offer it.
Yeah,
Like diversity of thought, I should say. Your perspective about like diversity of thought is what makes things better. It's like
totally.
we get to think about things and say, I think that's true or not true, but like that's really important. And the environment we're in isn't super supportive for that at the moment.
No, I haven't experienced. Have you experienced that a lot as an adult?
No, no. But like
Because
I
we're about the
believe,
same age. Like I haven't experienced any environments like that really. I feel like even when I was back in school for the 4th time, I was maybe like 24 or so, 23, 24, and like it was it there was already an environment where like I wasn't gonna be in my social work class with a black professor and be like, "Hey, do you think equity in this situation is really useful?" Like, no way am I saying that.
you helped me realize something, Demetra, in my I hadn't thought about it that way that like since I've been an adult, there's never been there hasn't really been that space because I am really hard on myself for not speaking up.
Oh, it's not yeah, I don't think
I'm
it's
really
just
hard on myself for that. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I not able to do that? And until you kind of said it that way, I didn't realize that it's been since I was 18. So for the past like 14 years, 15 years, that like that wasn't like all through grade school, middle school, and high school, you could be Republican, you could be Democrat, and we could
yeah.
talk about it. And then because it was a new thing, being a freshman, it's like new rules. Just take those new rules on. You didn't know, like I hadn't been exposed before, so how would I know that it could be different than this?
Yeah.
There was just like a way I subscribed, and that makes it make a lot of sense why it's
Oh
changed.
yeah. Well, the thing about I believe there's some graph that I've seen with wokeism is like the sort of peak. Like I want to say that it was at its like 2010 is kind of when it like escalated a ton. Like it started to
Mm,
become more normal everywhere. And then I think it sort of went up and up. And then maybe in like the mid 2000s, I don't know, it sort of maybe peaked and stayed or went back down. There was some way I saw it graphed out because they can graph it out using the language and how much the
okay.
language is used.
Sure.
Um, and certain terms are used. But I think yeah, what was like right around the time we went to school was kind of like the peak um wokeism time. And so
Yeah.
yeah, in high school I remember because before I only turned Democrat in school. Actually, I shouldn't say it was totally because of school. It was also because I had a roommate who was super liberal. Like her family was Democrats, and my family had always been Republican. Like my
Mm,
grandparents were Republican. My parents weren't particularly anything. Like I think my mom was a registered Republican, but my dad was an independent, and neither of them were very strong and convicted of their beliefs.
mm.
But I just adopt like my family was Republican and I was like, well, Republicans. I had an Obama sticker on my car in when I was 16 because I just liked being like
Yeah.
provocative in that way. And I would argue with kids in class and they would be like, they knew way more about. I didn't know anything about politics really. I just was like, no Obama. And I would be like, I'm not racist. I just like I wasn't even worried that people would think I was racist because I was like, I'm obviously not racist. It wasn't like used in that way like it is.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
has been. It was just sort of like I was like, I'm obviously not racist, and I just don't think a Democrat should be president. And then when I had a roommate whose family was a Democrat, that was my first election getting to vote was Obama.
Mm,
And uh she was gonna vote for Obama and we talked a lot about politics. She's still like just one of the best people. I love her so much. Because she would really engage with me like in these conversations and she would like listen and uh I got to like share what I actually believed with her. And when the more we talked, I was like, oh, I think that my actual beliefs feel more in line with Democrats.
mm.
And so then I was like, we watched the debates and stuff, and I was like, I like Obama. I'm gonna vote for Obama. And that was what I did. And he won, and it was exciting. And I just
Yeah.
like moved on. Um, but I don't remember it being so intense,
No. Right.
any of it.
Right. No, it
Um,
wasn't. It wasn't.
and then I think it got more intense during COVID.
Hmm. Because then there were they put like you don't care to kill people. Like there are people in
Right.
society who don't care to kill people. So then if you're a murderer, like how can you be accepted? Like
Yeah.
and like I mean that. If you're
Yeah.
thought of as a murderer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People don't remember what that was like. Did you get vaccinated?
No.
No. Yeah. It was a horrible time.
It was
People
terrible.
don't remember. I saw someone post the other day that they were like, don't forget how people were advocating for unvaccinated people to go into camps. And I was like, right, I forgot that there were people calling for that. They were like, there should be camps like for unvaccinated people where they go to live so that they're not killing the rest of society.
Yeah.
It red pilled a lot of us.
Yeah. Wild times. Very wild times. I think it's so fortunate when we have people like your roommate who
Yeah.
engages because what I have found so many times is that I actually we want the same things.
Yeah.
We just believe that there's different ways we'll get to them. And
Yeah.
like, then it's like we don't have to be mad at one another. Like this is you everybody thinks differently. Like everybody thinks something different is going to be the thing that works.
Yeah.
I don't my husband and I get along great. We don't agree on everything. Like that's weird.
Yeah.
If you would, that would be weird. I think
Yeah.
someone would be dishonest if you thought you agreed with everything.
we have to be able to have those conversations. I'm like really excited. There's certain topics I want to get people on episodes of this podcast for where we have a disagreement or like there's certain topics like to dive more into them and because I think you get to know your own views better too. Like
Yeah.
it's important to really be able to take that stuff in. I wrote in my I post when I wrote about voting for Trump that I had read Anna Karenina this year, and that was a big part, or last year, of me reading the book was realizing like that that book was written in the late 1800s, and I was like, it was obviously so common in that time period for family members all the time because I think I want to say that it was like communism was becoming more there was a lot of conversations around how the land was used between like rich people and like the poor people who were working on the land and
Mm.
they would have a lot of debates in the book like the characters
Mm.
between each other and they were family members and they'd have heated debates and one would feel all angry and upset, but then they would like drop it and just move on. And they were still like family and they got along great. It was just like they talked
Normal.
about this topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, I was like, this shouldn't be so shocking. Like, it's kind of alarming that it's so shocking for me to
Yes.
read because I've been living in a place where, like, you're not a people, you don't do that anymore. Like, the conflicts I've had with people um, who think differently, who are very, very woke, uh, there's been zero room for questioning. Like, it's just like you can't question that mindset, and it's so unhealthy to not be able to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't discuss when inherently somebody having an opinion makes them bad.
Yeah.
It's opened me up in a lot of ways. You know that guy, have you ever seen that guy who it's a black guy who unconverts members of the KKK?
No.
There's
But
a
it's
black guy, I
fascinating.
don't know his name, but his whole thing is that he's like, he will go as a black man to KKK rallies today and like, he will talk to them and like engage them in conversation. And he'll be like, well, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And they'll start talking. And he has managed to successfully, I don't know the word, unconvert, remove,
Yeah.
like, uh, like many, I want dozens. Like he has, and they all give him their robes when they leave. Like they'll leave the KKK and they like, because he's shown them through their calm discussion. Like that's more of the way that we wish we could all be. Like there's
Yeah.
this, then you can kind of talk and then you're like, oh, I don't really see it that way. Or we agree on more than we think or whatever.
That brings like tears to my eyes. Like
Oh,
that's really that's where it's at. That's where
yeah.
it's at. And then coming back to DEI, it feels like we put a lot of barriers between one another to have those conversations. Like
Yeah.
a lot of fear for me to even engage with someone who I would think, even though it's the reverse for me, someone who I think doesn't like me, I'm like afraid to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
And then stalemate, like nothing changes. So, oh, I am so grateful for him and his work. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, right? Because it's made you with like a black friend, you would be way less likely. I've heard lesbians actually talk about this a bunch. How, because I've been reading a lot of things by lesbians who have had a really bad time in gender ideology because they've basically been the ones who have gotten the worst end of the stick because
Mm.
like men pretending to be women are infiltrating all their spaces. So there's
Ugh.
no, and then they're like, oh, if you won't hook up with me, because I'm a real woman, then you're transphobic. And so they're getting all this pressure to like have
Oh.
sex with these trans identified men. And they're like, no, and there's like, fuck, yeah, it's creepy. There's like a lot of subreddits dedicated to men with this fantasy of converting lesbians. It's just like, poor lesbians don't have spaces anymore
Ugh.
to come together and like be lesbian. Like they're not like we can't connect together as a group and like network or whatever, hang out because every space that was for us is now infiltrated by trans people. And then we're like, but and then I saw something by one the other day who she was saying like uh a lot of her straight friends, like coworkers especially, um because she's lesbian, she gets grouped in with like the woke people. As I imagine, like any black person probably could feel this way too, like any black conservative or whatever, where like a straight white person groups you into the woke and they're like, well, I don't want to share any of my real opinions around this person because they're probably woke since they're lesbian.
Yeah.
And
I
so
hadn't
then they're
thought
like
about
even more isolated and cut off
Wow.
from society because it's like now you're being treated as this thing that you're not even actually like you don't even agree with it. It's all terrible. It just separates us more and more and more. I used to be able to have conversations with my black friends of about racism. Like that was right around the time, like 18 to 20 years old, like right around the time where it wasn't too intense.
Hmm.
Like we could talk about it. Now I don't think you could talk about it like the past
Yeah,
5 years.
if you, I don't, I feel like if you don't have a relationship that precedes now, like if
Or
it's
I guess if you aren't sure you're on the same
same
page, like I think
page, yeah,
people would be. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
sharing your experience. Is there anything else you want to wrap up with, or do you think we like covered it all?
I mean, I think we covered it all. I just know that like I suffered in isolation. I don't know, suffered's a strong word, but I like went through this
Well, if you were waking up in the middle of the night panicking, I was that
it
sounds
was
like suffering.
a little rough, but yeah, just like a reminder if you're listening and you're on this trajectory in a different spot, like it does shift and
Yeah.
it's okay. It's all good.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.